welcome to Movie Science Review, where you get to see some wonderful hot takes from an engineer on the science and technology presented in movies and TV shows. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at For All Mankind, Episode 2 from Season 1.
A voyage around the moon must be made in two phases. A rocket ship taking off from the Earth's surface will use almost all the fuel it can carry just to attain a speed great enough to balance the pull of gravity.
So, that's one thing I often tell people about rockets and things. I'm not a rocket scientist, I don't claim to be, but one thing it's interesting is most of the fuel is used just getting to orbit. So when you see a giant Saturn V rocket, which is over 300 feet long, it's like 90% of it is gone by the time it gets to orbit. You just have the command module and something called the service module, and that's pretty much it. So wherever returns to Earth is a teeny tiny fraction of the giant rocket that went into space. And so this is the real Wernher von Braun, and I think these were from Disney, maybe back in the day. I can't remember. But so this is some of his early concepts for rockets and stuff, and then you see at the top it looks something that was probably very much the progenitor of the space shuttle, except it's on the top. And so they had thoughts about these things way back when, where you fly up into space with a giant rocket and come back with a space plane. So it's not a new idea with the space shuttle.
We are definitely concerned about stability once we fire the ascent engine from this canted position.
In the meantime, we're losing extra weight.
So, the last episode, they landed on the moon crooked, and so they're showing them also being crooked. And apparently the issue is taking off from a crooked location. They're worried about being able to go back into orbit. I thought that was a little bit odd. Obviously, you don't want to be crooked, but depending on which way you're pointing, it actually can be an advantage. I would presume they're pointing in the wrong direction, so they can't rendezvous with the command module very easily. And they're throwing things out of the hatch to lighten it up, which I thought was odd too, but I presume, it was not a bad idea if they're going to have to use fuel to right themselves. If it's a little lighter, that's fine. And of course, the gravity is going to be pulling them down towards the moon at an angle. So I just thought it was interesting.
Aboard stage. Engine arm ascent.
Engine arm ascent. Here goes nothing. Ignition.
So I like I have no idea how the actual lunar module works and the ascent module commands, but I like that they needed several sequences of switches and things to actually launch it. It's not just a one-button thing. I imagine it'd be several safety features, so you have to have an arm fire type command in order to do that. So it's good that they show that. I really like that.
Houston, we're definitely picking up a little shimmy.
Okay, the shimmy part I thought was kind of funny. But the reason why I stopped this one was I thought it was odd. They have this actual live telemetry like this. I would not think they would have that. That seems very odd. It's very much a 21st century or late 20th century thing to have. Just to be able to have some exact telemetry. You would need quite a bit of instrumentation and data to do this and antenna alignment. It just seemed a bit odd that they have this precise, this graph showing, he's going sideways and then go up and kind of real time like that. It seemed odd and probably not realistic that they would have that kind of data immediately. Okay, so they're up and they made it. I'm just going to be a bit nitpicky in that the closure speed seems way too fast. That's not a rendezvous, that's a bypass. He's going to fly right past that thing, or if you try to dock at that speed, they obliterate each other. But, it's TV and they want to show it. If it showed realistic, it'd be really boring. They would look like they weren't moving towards each other. So I understand they accelerated it, but that just seemed way too fast.
This is the new front in the Cold War. If the Soviets are going to build a lunar military outpost up there, the president wants one too, and he wants it first.
He can't be serious.
Frankly, I've never seen him more serious. We're talking a major realignment of priorities here. We may have lost the moon, but we can still win the race for the base.
So the reason why I picked this scene was I remember reading some sort of outline NASA had generated in the early 70s, and they really talked about stuff like this. They had grand, huge plans of building orbital space stations and moon bases and going to Mars and all kinds of stuff. So this is interesting that with this alternate history, they're kind of pushing that just to stay ahead of the Russians. They really had big plans. They had big plans, but they ran out of money. The Vietnam War and all kinds of stuff were gotten away, and the new president, Nixon, cut a lot of that stuff. But NASA really had big plans for doing really cool stuff. And there was wish I could find it. I don't know where I did with it. I think I saved a copy on one of the computers. And I read it and I wept because it was so beautiful. All these grand schemes, it was almost like science fiction, all the stuff they wanted to do and the thought experiments they had for the future of the U.S. space program up until, I think, the 2000s. And this was written in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was just a fascinating read. So I totally see them thinking like this in an alternate history.
Margot,
I thought you'd already left for D.C.
I am disappointed in you.
Why? What happened?
You've made me look very bad. I was second to the moon, and now you...
Okay, I picked this scene, not necessarily for anything they're saying, just I thought it was neat. You look in the background and you see all kinds of pictures and diagrams and stuff on her office. And we really do stuff like that. As an engineer, we'll often put up graphs and charts and diagrams and things for reference. Even in the day of digital access to lots of different things, it's still nice to sometimes print something out and stick it on the wall for reference. And it is often quite useful, especially for something very large. You can see it in the background. I can't quite tell what it is. Maybe a capsule or something. But, sometimes just a wiring diagram or a components or just overall architecture of something is nice just to be able to stick it on the wall and just be able to quick look at it without having to scroll around on a computer. I do think it's funny that she looks like she's using a drafting table. And I can see a drafting machine. If you ever... have some experience with drafting. My father was a drafter, so it's interesting to see some of these old tools that I haven't seen in a long time. It's a nice touch. Don't know why she would per se. Well, she may have a use for a drafting table. I'm not going to go there, but it's neat to see something like that. And she's got some lights and things. That's pretty cool.
I've had this for over 20 years, and now I would like you to have it.
Okay, what he's showing her is a slide ruler. If you're not familiar with these, this was an analog computer that they used back before calculators became popular. Calculators really didn't come out until the 70s. They may have had some in the 60s, but they weren't really affordable until the late 70s. And so for scientists and engineers to do calculations, and they need to do logarithms or exponents and things like that, they use a slide ruler. And this was, you can see that the centerpiece slides, moves left and right, and allows you to do some mathematical functions that you would normally pop up in a calculator. I never had one like this. I had one as a kid. I had one that did conversions, which was actually really neat. I can do English to metric conversions, stuff like that really quickly. And it has a sliding, you can see on the left, there's a clear piece with a line in it. And so by aligning the middle piece and the clear piece, you can do some mathematical operations. Apparently it took quite a bit of training to learn how to use one of these things. But that's how they did things back in the 50s and 60s and even earlier. They used slide rules, and these engineers, you had to be very smart and sharp to be able to do this kind of stuff. And they had computers, but they were the size of a building and didn't do a whole lot, and they were difficult to use. And they certainly didn't have it on your desktop. So you had to go to a room and have to use a computer versus having this on your desk. It's like having a calculator. We were talking before much integrated circuits and digital electronics. They had transistors and some very primitive digital electronics, like a lunar lander, that were basically bleeding edge at the time. So I thought it was a nice touch.
Feeling like we should make a little detour here, Freddy.
Come on, Gordo.
Don't you remember the ass tune we got last time? Going to tower, NASA 963.
So I don't know, I just picked a scene because I like airplanes, and those white airplanes we're flying are T-38s. Since in the Apollo era and Mercury and Gemini, they're all pretty much test pilots. So they had to maintain flight status, they'd fly around their T-38s for both transportation and practice and to stay current. And so it was nice to see to show that tradition that's still held up today. They use the same planes, T-38, a trainer, a military trainer, jet trainer. And of course, they're showing a dude a low flyby of his house, which was generally a very much a no-no. He'd probably get in really, really big trouble if he really did that. I've heard stories about people getting really into deep trouble doing extremely low flybys and flyovers of things unauthorized.
And Apollo 11 lunar modules, they had almost the same amount of fuel, correct?
Yes, sir. Little shy of 18,000 pounds in the descent stage and 5,000 in the ascent.
So I heard those numbers, and I looked it up, and that's accurate. They carried a lot of fuel. I had no idea the lunar module and ascent module had that much fuel. It's a huge amount. Relatively speaking to their size, they're not very big aircraft, so I thought that was just interesting. And I learned something today.
For descent stage, 3, 2, 1. But I pulled back. And it was my call. No one else's.
I just picked this, just a thought on command. They're questioning whether he would follow orders or not. And my first thought was, well, these are military guys. Granted, when they're in space, it's ultimately up to their decision what to do. But when they have a mission, that kind of stuff, I would think he wouldn't vary from the mission. Being a military guy, following orders is key. So it just seemed that the drama seemed to be played up a little much for something that I would think the average military person would have, followed the orders to the letter best he could, and not go rogue and try to land on the moon without being authorized to. That seemed way, way far-fetched.
I mean, it's not a time for pie in the sky ideas about Mars and solar system.
Respectfully, Congressman, now is precisely the time. We cannot allow fear to drive us from our purpose. What we are seeking is the key to our future.
Yes, as I talked before, they had grand plans of going out in space. This was more than just, for some people, just being the Russians. It was really a whole new venture for the human race to go out into space and see what's out there and see what's on our planets and the celestial bodies and things. So I can see Von Braun thinking really big on this and not just going to the moon.
Since until very recently it was classified as part of Operation Paperclip, is that you were also a member of the elite Nazi organization known as the SS.
That was a matter in which I had no choice.
Not everybody gets invited to a photo op with the Fuhrer. Dr. Von Braun, only a few minutes ago, you stated...
So the real Werner von Braun really was a member of the Nazi Party, and in the show they talked about the V1 and V2 bombs. He was a rocket scientist, and he helped develop especially the V2, which was a ballistic rocket. It was a rocket that was used to attack and terrorize the British populace. They would launch from France, I believe. I don't think it had range from Germany. And it would just strike at the cities in England. This was an unguided rocket. It had gyros and clocks in it just to sort of aim it best it could into a city and population. And you couldn't hear them coming. And suddenly, somebody's house would blow up or a building would blow up, and it was a V1. It could intercept them like the V2s, which were more like guided unmanned aircraft. The V2s were, did I say V1 or V2? So the V1s were basically airplanes with a sort of rocket engine on it that was unguided, and they could shoot those down. But the V2s were basically a shoot up into space or near space and come back down and hit in England. And at the end of the war, the Allies realized the German engineers and scientists were very valuable. And so it was a big fight between the United States and Russia to grab as many scientists as they could to use to help develop their own programs. So this was, morally it's probably pretty shady. But ironically, Wernher von Braun was the real one, was really the head guy for our lunar program here in the United States. So, but it seems odd that in the show they would play up that, oh my God, he's a Nazi. Did you know that? I would have thought that was very common knowledge that he was in the Nazi party. And I just sort of overlooked it and hand waved it. I wasn't around back then, so I don't know how big of a secret it was. Would like to look it up, or if anybody knows. But it seemed a little stretched that it would be such a big surprise to people at the time that he was. And whether or not he was a diehard, anti-Jew Nazi, or it was just a means to an end so he could build and fly rockets and he didn't really care about politics, that's still up for debate. And I don't know if he's ever really talked about it before he died. But yes, that is true. And this was very much happened. And, world history sometimes is a very, very gray and muddled subject.
I've instructed him to begin negotiations with Les Ductaux.
I just thought it was a good touch. Smoking. This was the 60s. They did a lot of smoking back then, and you can smoke anywhere, anytime. Can't do that anymore, but that is interesting. You see a lot of people lighting them up, and that's exactly what they did back then.
And on this momentous day, as Apollo 12 readies to begin the search for the location of the first American...
So I think on a previous episode, I had kind of criticized the graphs and charts that they had shown, and some of them look kind of weird, and I don't know what the hell. This one actually looks like something more or less reasonable. You have on the bottom, it looks like velocity in feet per second, and the numbers actually look fairly decent, and I'm not sure what's on the left is cut out. It might be altitude or something, I'm not sure, or time. But I thought that was interesting. It's sort of a logarithmic scale. So that's pretty neat.
9, 8, ignition sequence has started.
This is a nice touch. Earlier, if you notice, his picture was on the wall in the middle. Now it's gone. They kicked him out because, oh my God, he's a Nazi. like suddenly that's, like as I said before, it seems weird that they would suddenly realize that. And so his picture, of course, is gone, and he's been ostracized.
All engines running.
Okay, so I was just talking about this graph, and there's some more details on it, and it shows velocity in feet per second, and on the left is altitude and times 1,000. So right now it's showing them roughly at 30,000 feet, according to this telemetry, but it's still on a rocket pad, so there's a major disconnect. Okay. I just had to stop on this. Corvettes. Back in the 60s, they had some cool cars. These are some really neat Corvettes. Oh, you can see two different eras. One, the black one looks like one of the early models, and is that silver? Bluish silver? So that was obviously a newer model. And of course, there's a famous scene, I think in the movie Apollo 13, where some of the astronauts were given Corvettes by a local car dealer for PR reasons. And so it's interesting it's probably either tradition or maybe they were still giving them. I'm not sure. Maybe these are the ones that were given to them because they were both astronauts. And you got the old jalopy station wagon on the left.
Cosmonaut is now on the lunar surface. It's a woman.
Again, a little bit nitpicking. It's odd as her face was that clear. I understand why they did it, so they can show a nice clear face. But it's just funny. It's like, man, that reflection looks a little too good for somebody on the moon and just lifted up the visor. I think you could probably barely see unless she was looking right at the sun, in which case she couldn't lift up the visor, the sun shield that she just did.
32-year-old Soviet cosmonaut has become the first woman to set foot on the moon.
Now, I just want to point out that the Russians actually were actually quite progressive in that they did put a woman in space. Obviously, they did not make it to the moon, but one of their early launches, maybe the third or fourth, I had to look it up, but there was a woman astronaut that went up into space, a Russian cosmonaut, and I don't remember her name. Okay, I decided to take a quick look up her name. Her name is Valentina Tereshkova. And she's still alive. She's 85 years old. And that's amazing. So look her up. She's a very striking lady. And she went up. And that's very interesting. A lot of the cosmonauts didn't quite survive a lot of that stuff, so it's great that she's still alive, and I wonder if she's written anything about it or a book or anything like that. And she's a major general in the Russian Air Force. So there we go. Anyways, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me and Movie Science Review, and stay tuned. I'll take a look at episode 3 in the not too distant future.